things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever Oh, what a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner. Is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner. Is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion? I'm lost in a wonderland of confusion.
Ripon Rabbit Hole is a community-driven radio. At times the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests, are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Ripon Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
Hello. This is My Life DIY, and
hi, this is JoJo.
Hi, my name is Ash.
Hey everybody, it's AJ the Ripon Rabbit.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light.
And you're now listening
to Dark Wolf's Den.
to Dark Wolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
Are ghosts real?
We had 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Does time travel actually exist?
The laws of physics seem to be compatible with time machines.
You know, sometimes I wonder about reincarnation. Don't you?
A 4-year-old boy in Adelaide, Australia, has told his parents that he used to be Britain's Princess Diana.
What would happen if the world found out that aliens were real?
I didn't say disclosure would be easy, but what is the alternative?
To establish a space force as the 6th branch of the armed forces.
We have so many questions and yet so little time, so to have you here, the pleasure is all mine.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave, hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness. This is the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and we are broadcasting live worldwide from a secret mountain cave hidden high up in the beautifully snow-covered peaks of the Idaho mountains. That's right. We're ripping through the electromagnetic soup, tearing through the atmosphere, and tunneling away into your radio like a quantum particle. This is the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing what has been called the British Roswell. That's right, it is the Rendleham Forest case file. Instead of going over a multitude of case files, tonight we're going to dig deep on this one and see what can be gleaned from the information, if anything at all. This is an incredibly intriguing case, and one that I hope you guys enjoy, ladies and gentlemen. That is the Rendleham Forest case tonight, Wednesday, March 10th, 2021, on the Dark Wolf's Den Show. But first, today in history. On this day, stuff happened, and then other stuff happened, and here you are listening to this show. And that is today's, I am totally kidding, guys. I gotta have some fun with it, right? Actually, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pretty cool one. On this day in 1876, the very first telephone call was made. It was made by Mr. Alexander Graham Bell, who said, "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you," to his assistant, Thomas Watson. And today, some people can't seem to stay off their phones to save their own lives. And that can be taken as literally as you'd like, right? But ladies and gentlemen, the very first phone call that kicked off the revolution of phones started on this day in 1876. And that is today in history. You guys really didn't think I'd gotten lazy enough to leave you hanging, did you? Come on now. I always got to have it today in history. It's important we know our history, right? And speaking of knowing our history, when it comes to ufology, a very historic case file is the Rendleham Forest case file. This is a case file that is filed by both British and American soldiers who were working together in Britain on a base at the time. Well, actually, two bases that were within a 6-mile radius of each other at the time. And this is a case file that occurred in December of 1980. December 26th of 1980, it looks like, is when this began. And this is one of the strangest of the case files I think I've ever seen or heard of. And there are some details in here that are really, really intriguing that we'll get to here in just a moment. But first, a little backstory on why the British and Americans were working together to begin with. So let's dive back down into the rabbit hole of history and find out what was going on in 1980.
At the outset of the 1980s, the Cold War had been in full swing for over 30 years, but was now entering a frightening new phase. The recent invasion of Afghanistan by Soviet forces had raised tensions between the world's superpowers, taking them to breaking point. It had also been a primary factor in the election of President Ronald Reagan, who had campaigned on a platform which promised to take more direct action against the perceived warmongering of the Soviet Union. At the time of his election victory, Reagan viewed existing US foreign policy with open contempt. The incoming president believed that the détente which the two main powers had agreed upon was the main reason that the conflict had yet to be decidedly resolved. He was determined to break the will of his opponent by aggressively escalating the funding and deployment of America's armed forces. Reagan's strategy was bold and had been conceived around the central concept that the already failing Soviet economy would not be able to survive an arms race to match his planned increases in military investment. Its inevitable collapse would hopefully result in the country's population taking to the streets, revolting against their government, and forcing political change to take place across the USSR.
And if you didn't grow up in the 80s, you would not really be able to comprehend the insanity here. I remember growing up, Russia was always the bad guy. They were always the one that was warmongering and about to attack the U.S. Of course, the Cold War was, like he said, in full swing, and it was not getting any better. And everyone knows, if you don't know, if you didn't grow up in that era, I guess, that is when the USSR split up and became what is today's modern Russia, this federation of states that they now have. That's a lot closer to the United States than what they did have was the full communist USSR, which was a completely different setup. And it fell in the 80s, of course. So this was a big time of political change across the world. Luckily, though, Reagan ended up having an ally in this battle and wasn't alone in this fight.
Such an undertaking was music to the ears of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who held equally dismissive views of the policies and agreements that her predecessors had put in place. Thatcher was quick to offer her American counterpart carte blanche to move whatever military resources he deemed necessary across the Atlantic and into mainland Britain, in readiness for a future strike across the English Channel and onto the European continent.
And this agreement led to the allowance of U.S. troops, of course, on British soil.
In a move that was typical of President Reagan's wider military build-up, the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing was ordered to phase out its aging complement of F-4 Phantom fighter jets, in order to make way for the arrival of the new ground attack A-10 Thunderbolt.
And I assure you, all of this becomes important later. As we hear a lot lately in the news, we'll circle back to a lot of this information.
Poised ready to counter any perceived Soviet incursions, its 3 sizable squadrons had been deployed across a variety of different European air bases, including 2 which were hidden away in the depths of the East Anglian countryside. Dotted across the sprawling county of Suffolk were countless tiny airfields, which had once played host to the Spitfires and Hurricanes that had vanquished Hitler's Luftwaffe. And it was 2 of these former World War II bases that the airmen of the 78th and 79th Tactical Fighter Squadrons now called home. Whilst half of their number were stationed at RAF Bentwaters, the remainder were housed at RAF Woodbridge, 6 miles to the south. Lying between the 2 American air bases were the 15 square kilometres of Rendleham Forest, a mixture of coniferous woodland and low-lying wetlands.
So the reason we went through all that is it's very important in a lot of these case files to have a full backstory and a full knowledge of the situation going on at the time, because we don't always comprehend and grasp the events of the day when we're many, many years later, like here in 2021. So it's good to go back and catch those little details of why the Americans were in England to begin with at these 2 bases. And it makes a lot more sense now why they were even split between the 2 bases. And like I said, in between you had 15 square kilometers of Rendlesham Forest, open, empty forests.
Now, as the dark and cold December of 1980 finally drew to a close around them, the American airmen and their commanding officers carried out their duties with no small degree of apprehension. They had little idea, however, that it was not just the Soviets they would need to be on their guard against.
And once again, with the Soviets at the time, there was a major Cold War, which is basically an information war of the time. And the ability to learn what your enemy's doing while having absolutely no information whatsoever about your enemy, this case being Russia, of course, there was this tension that anything could happen at any time.
At approximately 3 a.m. on the 26th of December 1980, the otherwise calm and tranquil atmosphere of the Boxing Day morning was suddenly shattered by the activation of the emergency alert system at RAF Bentwaters. As deafening sirens blared in the rooms and corridors of the sprawling airbase, armed sentries spilled from doorways, sprinting across parade squares and car parks towards their established firing positions along the base's perimeter fence. Amongst them was Airman Steve Longereau, who had been out on foot patrol in and around the base's weapons lockers at the time the cacophonous alarms had unexpectedly kicked into life. As he joined his colleagues manning the nearby fence line, his attention was immediately drawn to something moving around, out in the depths of the adjoining woodland. The inky darkness that usually separated the looming fir and pine trees of Rendleham Forest was now unnaturally illuminated with an unearthly red glow.
So let's think about this scene here. You've got a bunch of American and British airmen at the base. The alarm is sounded. Everyone runs out of their position. It's the middle of the night. It is pitch black, remember. This is one of these bases that are way off in the outskirts, if you will. So it's dark, and all of a sudden there's an eerie red glow of a light coming from the middle of the forest where absolutely nobody should be, especially at that time of night.
This strange iridescence seemed as if it was being projected by a number of vividly coloured objects, which were hurtling back and forth at great speed.
So now on top of this, there are objects that are, it says vividly colored. It didn't really give a really good description on the color, but it said these objects are now flying back and forth at high speed through the forest. And it kind of reminds me already of these UFO reports where it talks about different lights that split off of each other and fly in these strange formations in the sky. It's strange to have it that low to the ground, but still yet it does remind me, that piece of the case file does remind me of those previous UFO case files that we've heard before.
The assembled airmen watched with a mixture of fear and bewilderment as the bright lights pulsated and flew around in an erratic fashion. Sometimes they would collide and ricochet off one another, resulting in a brief shower of bright red sparks and a loud metallic crash, before they shot off again in opposite directions.
Very important details right there. So, number one, when they crashed into each other, the fact that they could crash into each other. Number two, they gave off red sparks when they crashed into each other. That's extremely significant and important in determining what type of metal, if you will, it could have possibly been. Why metal? Because of the crashing sound and the sparks that were produced at the time. We must make the assumption that these were small metal objects of some type that were flying around, perhaps probes of some type, if you will.
On a number of occasions, the objects would slowly rise up above the tree line into the night sky, hovering perfectly still, as if they were conducting some form of surveillance on the US airbase.
Or the area in general, but once again, I would suggest that they were probes of information of some type.
To the staff on duty up in the control tower, the objects were also clearly visible, but bizarrely were giving off no radio signals or radar signature.
Two more very important pieces of information. No radio signature was coming off of these craft. Now that's intriguing, because radioactivity would be kind of assumed to be if they had come through space. But that is just an assumption. Second, the fact that they didn't show on radar. Well, we know that these things have a way of messing with electronic equipment and shutting off radios and car things like that. So perhaps it would be the reason that it also cannot be detected with radio or radar signals, because it also is able to cancel those out. It's only a theory, but a possibility.
The order was given that all personnel were to remain inside the perimeter fence, and to do nothing other than observe the objects. It seemed the more prudent option, as opposed to sending any of the younger and possibly frightened airmen blundering out into a dark forest in the middle of the night, risking accident or injury.
But what would eventually be found in that forest, I don't think any aged man could have comprehended or understood.
Down the road at RAF Woodbridge, everything had remained still and silent, until the guards stationed at the east gate radioed to report having observed a light aircraft of some kind, slowly descending into the woods a short distance away from the airfield.
And yet again, another very important piece of this case file, because you've got an officer 6 miles away who is also witnessing these strange lights in the sky that are going down into the forest of Rendleham. So it cannot be just the ones over at the first base seeing anything. Bentwaters, if it was only seen by them, it would be the case. But the fact that there was a guy over at Woodbridge who also seen the exact same thing they were witnessing over at Bentwaters really makes it a little bit harder to call it a mass hallucination or any kind of prank or things like that. Though prank can be ruled out, it's a little bit harder to rule it out when the thing is seen from 6 miles away. That means the light had to go up a pretty good distance and then come down into the forest for everybody on both sides to see it.
The duty officer, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, quickly ordered one of the base patrols to head out into the woods to confirm the validity of the sighting. The group dispatched into the forest by the colonel consisted of 3 men: Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston, along with Airman First Class John Burrows and Ed Cabansag.
And this is where things start to get really strange.
As the American servicemen cautiously entered the tree line, the air around them slowly began to change. The further they progressed into the forest, the warmer it seemed to get. They also became aware of a low humming noise, which sounded as if it was gradually increasing in intensity.
Both of which have been reported in previous UFO cases across the world. And this is yet another important piece of the puzzle.
The already nervous airmen were suddenly startled by a chorus of unnatural screams and cries, emanating from somewhere not too far away from their position. As they quickly struggled to regain their composure, the 3 men realized that what they had just heard was the livestock at nearby Capel Green Farm, which were apparently in the process of being worked up into a frenzy by someone or something.
And we know that animals are usually very sensitive to these things, which usually denotes a electromagnetic reason, because we know animals are a lot more sensitive to the electromagnetic spectrum. So they could have something to do with the electromagnetic propulsion system that they theoretically could be using on a craft like that. That is, of course, just a theory, but the fact that the animals are getting worked up just as well as the humans really does denote that there's something going on there.
It was at this point that Peniston made the decision for the group to separate. He ordered Cabansag to peel off and follow the tree line for a short distance, heading in the direction of RAF Bentwaters, whilst he and Burrows would instead continue to penetrate further into the depths of the forest itself. They had not gone far when they suddenly came across what appeared to be a strange metallic object, hovering just off the ground in the middle of a small clearing.
So whatever this object is, they have come face to face with it right in the middle of the forest.
Peniston was a specialist in aircraft identification, and had never seen anything belonging to either the Soviet or American air forces, which even remotely resembled the floating craft he was now looking at. The object was triangular in shape, with a surface that was covered in a combination of large red lights and smaller blue ones, and it seemed to be emitting a light mustard-coloured mist onto the ground below.
And here again we have the classic description of the triangular craft, minus the mustard-colored gas coming out of it. That's kind of a new detail I don't normally get in case files.
When the 2 airmen slowly advanced towards it, the floating object remained both silent and completely immobile. As he edged forwards, Peniston was struck by the lack of any recognizable features anywhere on the exterior of the craft.
One thing about countries is they're really, really good about plastering their name all over any kind of design craft that they build. So for this to have no revealing marks whatsoever is also a very intriguing point.
There was no sign of any kind of propulsion or exhaust system, nor any form of steering mechanism. He also noted the lack of any bolts or rivets, with the surface of the craft appearing to be one solid, unbroken structure.
And yet another piece of information that we usually glean from a lot of these UFO case files, especially the ones that get a really, really good sighting of a saucer craft or the actual craft itself, they usually say it's completely seamless. Like it was no rivets, it wasn't put together, like it was all one piece, just like he's describing here. Though usually it's the saucer craft that are described like that. Clearly those are not the only ones.
Burroughs came to a halt a short distance away and watched on as his staff sergeant continued to walk right up to where the vessel was hovering. Peniston seemed to be utterly entranced by what he was seeing, drawn to a series of strange symbols that were etched into the outer hull of the object, which he would later say resembled ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs.
If I'm not mistaken, the Roswell material, as well as other materials that have been acclaimed to be found by UFO paranormal researchers, have claimed to see different symbols and pictograms, if you will, a lot like Egyptian hieroglyphs along the edges of some of this material. So it's interesting that that would just fill in along with other case files also that I have heard.
Peniston reached out and was able to take hold of the craft's exterior, describing it as smooth and warm to the touch. As his fingers moved across the polished surface and then onto the engraved symbols, it felt as though they had passed from a pane of glass and onto a sheet of sandpaper.
It's interesting that he gives a description of two very distinct and different textures of material, from a glass-like smooth material to a sandpaper-like material. It's very intriguing that that specific description is in there.
He could also discern what seemed to be a humming sensation being generated beneath his fingertips. Suddenly, the airman felt a physical jolt, as if a low electrical current was being passed through his body. The hieroglyphs had now illuminated, and he was temporarily blinded by an intense white light, which completely obscured his view. As Peniston struggled to regain focus, he could see what resembled streams of ones and zeros, dancing around at the edge of his field of vision. This sensation continued for several minutes, before abruptly coming to an end, and causing the staff sergeant no lasting pain or ill effects. The two airmen then remained in position, observing the hovering craft for a further 45 minutes, taking notes and drawing sketches of it.
45 minutes they stood there sketching and drawing and taking pictures, if you will, of the craft. Hand-drawn pictures, mind you. But still, a lot of data garnered, or can be garnered, in 45 minutes. And these ones and zeros, Jim said, went through his head for many, many years, and he actually wrote them down, and they have been translated, and I happen to have the translation right here.
The next day, Jim Peniston started to see ones and zeros in his mind. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he had to write this down in his notepad. But when Jim and John Burroughs reunited in 2010, this UFO encounter started to get very interesting. During John's visit, Jim showed John the original notepad of that night. Now, John couldn't believe that Jim was able to keep this hidden from the world for all these years. John saw that there were a lot of pages within Jim's notepad that had nothing but ones and zeros on them. Now, John realized that this was binary code. Jim never knew that he had in his possession a message from beyond the stars.
Jim had no concept of binary code at all, ever, so it's not like he even had any idea what he had in his possession to begin with.
Right away, they hired an expert to decode it. And a couple days later, the decoder told Jim and John that there was indeed a message within this binary code. The message says...
All right, you guys ready to hear the message that come out of the Rendleham Forest case from this guy just touching this UFO? What kind of information was perhaps translated to him? Well, you're going to have to wait to the second half, ladies and gentlemen. It looks like the clock has got us, so we're going to go ahead and take a network break right here, and we will be back with the message from Rendleham Forest in the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den Show right after these messages. Don't you touch that dial. That's right.
We gotta stoke the fires and run off the men in black. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
It's the Dark Wolf's Den Show with the Animals Radio. That's right. They're wilder than ever.
Ow! That's right, your weekend has officially begun. Hi everyone, it's AJ, the Ripon Rabbit. Are you enjoying tonight's Dark Wolf's Den? If you are and you haven't done so already, please make sure to thumb up that video. Hit that subscribe button and ring that bell. You'll get our notifications every time we go live. We're here every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, bringing you the very best of common sense radio, the Ripon Rabbit Hole. Jerry Hicks in the Dark Wolf's Den will return again tomorrow night, Thursday, March 11th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Howl along with him as he howls at the Fermi paradox. I'm not sure exactly what that is. I'm curious, but I'll be back again Friday night, March 12th, with Hoarders. We explore hoarders and hoarding. That's right. March 12th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then Saturday, March 13th, endorphins. Explore the rabbit hole of endorphins. We're going to include an on-air experiment. I can't wait to share my endorphins experiment with you. Then we'll end out the weekend together right as we discuss minimalists, all the way from hoarders to minimalists. I can tell you, it's going to be a great weekend as we explore the rabbit holes ahead. If you have not done so already, please hop on over to the riponrabbithole.com. That's RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. There you can sign up for your exclusive Backstage Pass, where we will send you out every Wednesday morning, direct to your inbox, our weekly schedule. We don't share or sell or give away or do anything other than that one email with your exclusive Backstage Pass sign up, which is going to unlock a bunch of really cool features where the conversation continues down the rabbit hole in our exclusive Rabbit Hole social media network. It's a lot of fun. It really is. Where the conversation continues after the show, down the rabbit hole at riponrabbithole.com. We'll return back to the Dark Wolf's Den show for Wednesday, March 10th, 2021, as we continue to howl at the Rendleham Forest incident. I can't wait to learn more. I really can't. Ripon Rabbit Hole.
This is My Life DIY, and
Hi, this is JoJo.
Hi, my name is Oz.
Hey everybody, it's AJ the Ripon Rabbit.
This is Cynthia Sue Larson.
This is your man Meta, aka Propagate This Light.
And you're now listening
to Dark Wolf's Den.
The Dark Wolf's Den Show on Ripon Common Sense Radio.
If you were meant to be controlled, you would have come with a remote, but you didn't. And that's why you listen to the Dark Wolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. And welcome back to the second half of the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we have been discussing the Rendleham Forest case. An incredibly intriguing case it is indeed. And right now, what we've got up to is the point where Mr. Jim Peniston has walked up and touched this craft that they found in the woods, this UFO for a lack of better terms. And he's touched this metallic craft and has been given this message of binary code in his mind, which he didn't realize at the time was binary code. And he jotted all this down in a notebook. It drove him so mad that he pages and pages and pages of ones and zeros and ones and zeros and ones and zeros back and forth. Well, it turns out this binary code wasn't just random. There was actually a message found in the binary code. Check this out, ladies and gentlemen. I have teased it all the way up to this point, but here is the message found in the binary code that Mr. Peniston received in his head from touching this UFO on December 26th, 1980. And apparently I don't have that audio bite. Okay, I thought I had the audio bite. Luckily, I do have the message pulled up here also, so I can go ahead and read it to you. Check this out. It says, Exploration of Humanity, 666 space 8100. Then it's got some coordinates, which ends up being the legendary place that was thought to be High Brazil on maps for many years. Then it says continuous for planetary advance. Then it says fourth coordinate continuous. There's some garble in the message. Then it says before. Then it has a series of coordinates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different coordinates. And each of these translate to a specific spot on the Earth. And it's interesting which spots they translate to. For instance, the first coordinate is Caracol, Belize. The second is Sedona, Arizona. The third coordinate corresponds to the Great Pyramid in Giza, Egypt. The fourth one corresponds to the Nazca Lines. The fifth one corresponds to a place called Taishanku, China. And the fifth one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sixth one is the Portara at Temple of Apollo in Naxos, Greece. So it's got all of these different coordinates to these places. Then it says eyes of your eyes. Then it says origin space. And it's got another set of coordinates also High Brazil once again. Then it says origin year 8100, which has led a lot of people to believe that this may not have been an alien craft at all, but a time-traveling machine of some type. But we're getting ahead of ourselves in the story here, so let's back up where Mr. Jim just touched a craft and he's had this experience. Now the craft has shot off into the distance, into the sky, and they have reported back to base, and they're reporting in and debriefing on everything that they have seen.
Lieutenant Colonel Holt. Charles Holt lived for rules and regulations, immediately committing that which his men had described to him down on paper. before passing it directly onto both his superiors and the local police force. Airmen were dispatched to the location that had been described by Penniston and Burrows, and reported they had found strange indentations on the ground there, along with what seemed to be burn marks.
So the physical evidence also seems to back up the case.
For the next 2 days, Holt became frustrated by the lack of an official response to his memorandum, and when his sentries continued to report that more lights had been sighted moving around in the nearby forest, he resolved to enter the woods with a group of airmen to conduct his own investigation. In the early hours of the 28th of December, armed with only flashlights and a Geiger counter, as they were operating outside of their jurisdiction, a small party made its way to the area described by Penniston and Burrows. Holt had decided to document his investigation using a portable tape recorder, and continued to dictate his findings as he made his way deeper into the forest. At the clearing in question, he found a series of circular indentations burned into the ground, which formed a larger triangular pattern.
So there were 3 circles on the ground, but they were in a triangular pattern, matching once again what the witness said they'd seen. And I love the fact that this guy got so frustrated that he put together a team of people and went to do the investigation on his own. I like this guy's attitude.
In addition to this, similar marks were burned into the sides of tree trunks dotted around the periphery of the clearing, as well as freshly broken branches and foliage. When the airmen investigated the scorch marks more closely, they found that the Geiger counter's reading immediately leapt up to double that of accepted background levels.
And like I mentioned in the first half, radiation is generally involved with these craft, which is usually why they're a lot warmer to the touch, if not almost burning to the touch. But the radiation usually comes, of course, from going through space, and just the general radiation of space, is thought to be the cause, although we don't know. It could be the propulsion system, it could be a wide variety of reasons, but whatever the case is, they actually have recorded this in many a case file to where these Geiger counters are reading insanely high radiation amounts after events have occurred.
Holt continued to document these observations on his tape recorder before one of his men shouted a warning. An unidentifiable red object was approaching them at speed, descending from the eastern skies. On Holt's recording, he describes this object as being like an eye, winking down at the men beneath it. As it now moved away from them, Holt and his group then followed the object for a short distance, where it appeared to explode and then break up into 3 smaller, star-like objects.
Once again, there's been a large number of UFO cases that have described this very action just in the sky, not necessarily at a lower ground level.
These began to fly around at impossible speed, emitting further explosions and strobe-like effects, at which stage the men elected to return to the safety of the airbase.
So it frightened these airmen to the point that they scrambled back to the base for safety.
These lights seemingly took up positions over RAF Woodbridge and started to buzz back and forth across the airfield at high speed, occasionally beaming rays of crimson light down on the weapons lockers that were dotted around the base. 3 hours later, they suddenly shot off again back out to sea, passing by RAF Bentwaters as they did so, leaving the American servicemen below wondering what the had just happened.
Oh, but leave it to the government to come up with a laundry list of ridiculous reasons. And if you want the most ridiculous answers you've ever heard, ask an archaeologist or a government agent, and you will get ridiculousness to the nth degree, especially at the time anyway, when it comes to the UFO topic. And here's how this case they tried their best to debunk and did a horrible job of. I hope you guys are ready for a good laugh, because each one of these get even more ridiculous than the last one. Check these out.
The investigation into the Rendlesham sighting was allocated to General Charles Gabriel, who at the time was serving as Commander-in-Chief of the Allied Air Forces in Europe. It took over 2 weeks for Gabriel to arrive at Bentwaters, and when he did so, It seemed to the airman stationed there as if he had brought every possible alternative explanation for what they had witnessed along with him.
A suitcase full of debunkery. This ought to be fun.
According to Gabriel and his investigators, the objects that had been observed descending from the skies above the base on Boxing Day were the remains of a Soviet rocket which had been re-entering Earth's atmosphere, having propelled a satellite up into space.
So, first off, these lights that were much closer than way up in the atmosphere, according to the witnesses, were just Soviet rocket lights, right? That's why it took this guy 2 weeks to get there. He had to get his list of approved reasons from above, right? From the heads of the government that were giving the false answers. So the first one, the lights, are just explained away as Russian rockets that they just didn't quite understand. Okay.
The red lights witnessed by Holt and his team in the early hours of the 28th of December would be similarly explained away.
Hey, when you got a good lie, keep using it, right? As long as the people will buy it. So, twice, and Charles Holt just happened to choose the other one night by chance that there just happened to be a Russian launch, right? And it probably is no record of said launch. I would almost put money on. I don't know that for a fact, but I would almost put money on there not being a record of a launch on either of these nights.
The Orford Ness Lighthouse was located a little further up the coastline from the 2 RAF bases. Investigators seized on 2 aspects of Holt's account, in which he described that the light he was witnessing was winking back at him. This statement, coupled with a similarity in the time taken for the lighthouse beam to complete a full rotation, and compared to the timings between the alleged sightings in Holt's audio recording, led them to assert that it was the lighthouse beacon he was witnessing off in the distance.
So if you remember the account, it was a red light that come up over him, moved over him, and he was referencing that it reminded him of an eye looking down on him. And winking down on him is the way he said it, but I don't see the lighthouse reflecting a red light that's going to come racing at them and then look down on them winkingly. That seems to me more of a descriptive use to try to describe something he couldn't quite understand, more so than a lighthouse blinking. I just, again, if you want ridiculous answers, let the government agents talk to you. They can come up with some explanations that'll make you scratch your head, but just wait, it ain't over yet.
But perhaps the most frustrating of the explanations offered by Gabriel and his team were the ones in relation to the alleged landing site in the clearing. The investigators reported that the indentations discovered on the ground were in fact animal burrows, as opposed to scorch marks.
And these animal burrows just happen to burrow in the exact same spot and the exact same shape in which the witness reported seeing an object, right? A metallic object. And that's what made these animals decide to burrow there. They're looking at animal burrows now. Without going out and doing any research in the field and looking for themselves, this is the conclusion that they have come to, is animal burrows. That explains everything.
The damage which had been found on the sides of the trees there was dismissed as cuttings and markings from local Forestry Commission employees, or the work of pranksters and local youths.
Oh, yeah, can't forget about those woodcuts in the trees that match the shape of the craft and all the evidence there. Nope, gotta explain that away as just cutters in the woods. You know, they just leave marks on random trees now, I guess. Because that's a thing they do, is just go around cutting trees in specific circular and triangular shapes. Okay, that's logical, I guess.
General Gabriel's investigation remains notorious for its lack of cooperation with the British authorities, as well as an accompanying campaign of threats and intimidation carried out towards the airmen involved. Steve Longereau and the sentries at Bentwaters maintain that they were ordered to sign official secrets documentation, barring them from discussing the incident for a 30-year period. At RAF Woodbridge, the investigating officers would end up going to even more drastic lengths. During interviews, some of the airmen were ordered not to discuss what they had seen with anybody else, and then advised that if they chose to contravene this order, bullets were cheap and would be used to enforce it.
And of course, intimidation was not a tactic that they were too low to stoop to at any time when it comes to the UFO phenomenon. And it really is disturbing, especially when these are soldiers you're talking about. These are U.S. military men that they're making very clear, if you talk, we will kill you. Your own government is telling you they will kill you. These intimidation tactics have been in place for years. A lot of people say, well, with that many people, you couldn't keep a secret. Really? You threaten everybody's family and everybody's livelihood and see how quickly they shut up, right? Especially back then when they really believed the government would go through with these threats. Of course, nowadays, people have gotten a little more lackadaisical with the threats and know that they're just that and can be exposed thanks to modern technology. But back then, they didn't have those technologies, and they took these threats very, very seriously. So they did their best to try to silence this. It's funny if it was just a bunch of animal burrows and woodcutters that they would go to such lengths to get the people to not talk about this ever again. Just very strange. Doesn't match their explanations at all.
Some of the witnesses had far weirder experiences. One of the airmen was apparently summoned to attend an interview that was being conducted at a property close to the airbase. The individual found this odd, as it did not meet the usual security protocols, but attended anyway. He arrived at a remote farmhouse and was greeted by two gentlemen who were dressed incognito. As he sat and chatted to them for around half an hour, he couldn't help feeling that the whole situation was terribly wrong. There was something incredibly eerie about these two men, who he said had strange doll-like eyes and exhibited bizarre mannerisms. He had a distinct sense that they were not who they claimed to be, and made his excuses to leave.
This, to me, sounds like a classic Men in Black encounter. I didn't, really realize it the first couple of times I had read through this case file, but if you look into and listen to the description of the guys at the farmhouse, it does sound like a very MIB Men in Black style meeting. Weird mannerisms, weird dress, just different things like that. It very much matches what we in modern day would call a Man in Black meeting.
His superior had no knowledge of this summons when the airman mentioned it to him, and demanded to know where this meeting had taken place. They arrived at the farmhouse a few hours later, only to find it dilapidated and run down. It looked as though it hadn't been lived in for many years, despite the fact it had been fully decorated and furnished when the airman had been there just a few hours before. This whole episode apparently affected the young recruit to such an extent that he had to seek therapy in the months afterwards.
I gotta say, even for the 1980s, that's pretty darn good to be able to take a old, dilapidated, rundown farmhouse and make it look like a normal farmhouse, and then hours later it be returned to a dilapidated, rundown shack at that point, if you will. I don't know, there's a lot of strangeness in that. It almost brings to mind the idea of the parallel dimensions and the Men in Black perhaps being just that, these parallel dimensional police of a type, if you will. I don't know, that is totally me talking off the top of my head right there, but an interesting thought if you look into the Men in Black. We might have to do an episode about that coming up. I've definitely got it on the list of topics. I just haven't got it into the schedule just yet. Speaking of schedule, let's get back on schedule with our topic here tonight, the Rendleham Forest incident. And now they're still doing their best to try to explain away these incidents. We've heard a couple of their goofy excuses thus far, and about the intimidation that they have tried to force upon these witnesses. But let's hear what other kind of craziness these government agents have up their sleeves.
These overt and aggressive efforts to gloss over the incident by the American authorities seem to be in stark contrast to their official findings. If what the men at the two air bases encountered was simply a remarkable convergence of natural phenomena, then why would their superiors go to such great lengths to try and suppress any testimony of the sightings?
The same question that I also mentioned a couple moments ago. Why are they so worried about intimidating witnesses to not talk if all they seen was natural phenomenon and regular things to begin with? There should be no reason for intimidation. They should be able to talk about just these natural, wondrous, coincidental series of impossible events. Yes, I did just cuss twice there. The words coincidence and impossible, of course, are dirty words on this channel, but yeah, you guys get the hint, get the point. There's a two-story going on here. The actions are not matching the words, in other words.
Could it be that what occurred does indeed have a more rational explanation than extraterrestrial visitors, but one that would be as equally disturbing to the British public? It has long been speculated that the two air bases were in fact being used by the US Air Force to stockpile nuclear weaponry, despite assurances by Margaret Thatcher to Parliament that this was not the case.
And this actually is a huge clue that adds a whole new level to this encounter, because as we've seen in a large amount of UFO encounters, they tend to be found around bases that hold nuclear weapons, to the point that there's been cases of the UFOs literally staying over the bases and turning off the nuclear weapons just to let us know that they could do it. So I think it's a good piece of evidence there that there's a good likelihood that nuclear weapons and nuclear capabilities were available on these bases, and that could explain why these UFOs were seen there as more of a warning, as they've done what seems for a long time, against the use of nuclear weapons. It seems to me if there are aliens that are watching this planet for whatever reason, it would be like the kids have found the matches. It's never going to end well if we aren't careful. So I think at this point it was the aliens, kind of a nod to the American or British government or both. Hey, we know what you have here. You can't hide it from us. That, of course, once again, is my own speculation.
Rather than some form of surveillance by an unknown party, is it possible that it was indeed the Soviets who are monitoring the two bases and their defenses?
A valid question, I will give it, but given the details of the case file, I just don't see how Russia could be involved in this one.
Witnesses who have spoken out claim that the beams of light descending on the facilities were concentrated in the vicinity of the weapons lockers. Was this some form of advanced or experimental Soviet technology trying to probe the American defenses and detect the nuclear weaponry that was allegedly being concealed there? Maybe, but time has moved on 40 years, and we have yet to see technology of this magnitude emerge from any nation, let alone Russia.
And of course, if the technology did exist, even in a top secret form in the USSR of the time, when the USSR fell and became what is now modern day Russia, a lot of documentation and information came out of Russia. However, there was not a single bit of documentation about this incident as far as them being involved, or any technologies that seemed even near out of this world, if you will. Not like the Germans, who are known or thought to have been working with UFO tech just as well as the Americans. It seems that the Russians didn't exactly have their hands on UFO tech, and if they did, they weren't doing a lot of work on it.
In the decades since the incident, further explanations for what took place have emerged, which vary wildly in terms of credibility. One of these is that the hapless airmen were unwilling participants in experiments conducted by their own government. Some believe that what transpired may have been the result of hallucinogens, or some degree of mind control that the men were unaware of.
Hallucinogens just don't work for me because it's a multiple person, multiple witness case file, and you would have to have all the witnesses on the exact same hallucinogen hallucinating the exact same thing at the exact same time for their own conscious experience. I just don't see that, once again, given the details of the case file, being a valid or rational explanation of the data.
Many believe that neither airbase was simply the forward operating post that the United States Air Force assert. It has been alleged that in recent years, a local resident who upgraded their internet was told by the engineer who carried out the work that he had found a mysterious bundle of buried cables leading off towards the base. He described these as being powerful internet cables that apparently dated back to the early 1980s, long before they had been invented.
That one does not surprise me as much because we've known for a long time that the government and military-industrial complex, and it is global, make no mistake, Britain's just as in on it as America is, but the military-industrial complex is at least 50 to 100 years minimum ahead of the general public, so it's a very good likelihood that they had the capabilities of high-speed, strong internet cable long before the public had the realization or the sudden invention, if you will, of the high-speed cable. Does it surprise you how through the 90s and early 2000s, but especially through the 90s, how there was just this sudden rapid, super rapid advancement in technologies, like they were releasing a lot of stuff more so than inventing? I don't know, that's just me ranting, but let's finish out this case file here, ladies and gentlemen.
In addition to allegations that the locations were secret testing grounds for experimental weaponry, other stories have emerged that revolve around the personnel who were based there. Some believe that the sightings were the result of pranks being played between the sentries at the two bases, who had rigged up coloured lights on their patrol vehicles and then driven around at speed in an attempt to scare their opposite numbers.
Which I mentioned prank earlier and the possibility of it being a prank, but again, if that's the explanation that it was a rigged up Jeep, I don't see that being a falsely identified triangular shaped vehicle that had the different symbols that were described and just the feeling of the two different. Remember, he very distinctly described the feeling of the two separate areas of the craft, the symbols opposed to the regular craft. Just too many pieces of the case file do not fit this explanation either.
It has also been claimed that in August of 1980, a few months before the incident, an SAS team was tasked with testing the security arrangements at the two sites.
Now, I gotta say, this next one here is quite funny. I'm actually going to give some credence to the possibility of this one, but check this out, guys. Every time I hear it, I kind of chuckle a little bit.
The specialists parachuted into one of the bases, but were easily detected, as the radar systems had recently been upgraded without their knowledge. The British servicemen were then captured and humiliated, before later being released.
Come on now, razzing each other is a classic American tradition, right? So, I mean, they got a little upset. Then again, I don't know how bad they, quote, humiliated them, but I don't know. The Americans were just having fun, right?
In revenge for this discomfiture, it is alleged that the SAS decided to cause a major embarrassment for their American visitors. During the winter of 1980, they rigged up a series of parachutes and kites, to which they added lights, flares, and smoke canisters. These were then deployed in and around the two air bases, successfully resulting in a hugely public incident, much to the delight of the elite British soldiers.
Now, as funny as that is, I will say it does explain a little bit more of the case. However, it does not explain, once again, the interaction with Mr. Penniston and the craft itself. I just don't see lights and smoke canisters and a rig-up of rig-ups being mistakenly seen as, oh my goodness, a UFO on the ground, especially not one that's going to transmit binary data that turns out to not be garbled but actually have real message in it. So, I don't know, it just, again, the case file just doesn't seem to fit all of the facts for this theory. It's closer. I'll give it to it. The theory's a lot closer to the facts that we hear, but it's still, there's too much in the case file that still does not fit for me to buy this one. Although, if anybody could pull off a prank like that, it would be the SAS. I will give credit where credit is due. Something else that makes this case file supremely intriguing is that it's not the first time that there's been a UFO case file surrounding the Bentwaters Rendlesham area. There was actually one years before this occurrence, and this will be the last story for the evening as we're actually just a little bit over time right now, but I wanted to include this. So yeah, this is actually a case file that happened years before the Rendlesham incident that everyone hears about nowadays. Check this out.
In August of 1956, radar operators at the base had detected a group of objects approaching from the sea at speeds of several thousand miles per hour. A C-47 transport aircraft, which had been coming into land at Bentwaters, had been forced to abort when a fast-moving white light had suddenly shot across its path, startling the pilot. Calls were made to the control tower at RAF Lakenheath, located 60 miles to the north, and they confirmed that they too were registering multiple unidentified aircraft on their radar screens. Not long after this, ground crews stationed at Lakenheath reported groups of luminous green and red objects moving around in the skies to the south of the base. 2 de Havilland Venom fighter jets were scrambled to intercept the intruders and soon confirmed visual contact with the objects. Almost immediately, one of the pilots was forced to disengage from the confrontation as his flight instruments began to wildly malfunction.
From radios dying to planes' instrument panels going haywire, there's most always reports like these when it comes to UFO events.
The remaining Venom pilot subsequently reported that he had been totally outpaced and outmaneuvered by one of the objects, which had then aggressively pursued him until he had broken off and headed back towards Lakenheath. When the UK government later tried to officially write these incidents off as a meteor shower, they found few commentators were willing to accept their version of events.
I'm very rarely ever willing to accept the government's version of events on pretty much anything. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think there was perhaps a UFO sighting that these gentlemen encountered in 1980 in England in the secret nuclear weapons base? Or perhaps it was their SAS counterparts that were upset with them and did their best to ridicule and make them look ridiculous. Or perhaps it was animal burrows and woodcutters, right? There's been a plethora of suggestions this evening of what it could have been, but to this day, officially, it remains unsolved. Recently, a colonel come out, I think it was, and said that he believes that there was nothing to the Bentwaters case, but going over the case file as many times as I have, I gotta say there's something here that matches more of the UFO case files than it does the explanations that I've heard tonight. But in the end, ladies and gentlemen, all we can do is look at the information given, apply a little common sense, and you be the judge. Judge. We got to close it out. That's right, that's it for this episode of the Dark Wolf's Den Show for Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. So whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we're glad you chose us to be right there with you. The den may be closing for this evening, ladies and gentlemen, but don't you worry. We will reopen it tomorrow, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central on Thursday, March 11th, 2021. Tomorrow night we will be back to talk about the Fermi paradox. That's right. There's a lot of questions when it comes to where is the rest of the life in the universe. Why don't we see UFOs and alien craft as regularly as we see planes, trains, and automobiles? Where is everybody? Of course, we have individual sightings, but where is the bulk of life in the universe? Why don't we have more of it found? And it is those questions that make up the majority of the Fermi paradox. Actually, a really amazing paradox. We're going to get into some of the solutions and a lot of the ideas surrounding these paradoxes, ladies and gentlemen. That is tomorrow, Thursday, March 11th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, right here on Ripon Common Sense Radio Network on the Dark Wolf's Den Radio Show. That's right. And speaking of the animals of radio, ladies and gentlemen, do I have a treat for you? Because on Friday, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, March 12th, 2021, all shows here on the network start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, by the way. But on Friday, March the 12th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, AJ the Ripon Rabbit's going to take to the airwaves. He's going to hoard up the airwaves, I should say, with his episode on hoarders. There's a lot of people who just don't know when to get rid of things and when not to. Some people want to hold on to everything because, just maybe. These are hoarders, and there's TV shows about them, and there's going to be a radio show about it on Friday, March 12th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, right here on Ripon Common Sense Radio. That's right. Then on Saturday, he's going to be back with another episode. AJ the Ripon Rabbit is at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, Saturday, March 13th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. He's going to be back to talk about endorphins, those funny little things that make us feel funny and happy, right? Maybe these are what the hoarders experience, these rush of endorphins. Maybe that's why they hoard all the time, right? Find out for yourselves what endorphins do, why they're important, and what you need to know. That's going to be on Saturday, March 13th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then on Sunday, March 14th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, AJ's going to be back with the opposite of the hoarders that he started the weekend with, and he's going to be talking about minimalists. That's right. I myself am considered a minimalist. I consider myself a minimalist anyway. I try to use the very bare minimum of what I can use, and I don't collect a lot of things. I'm not a hoarder. I'm more of the minimalist. I collect very little. There are two ends of the spectrum, and he's going to touch on both of them. AJ the Ripon Rabbit is this weekend on Ripon Common Sense Radio. So come back for that discussion on minimalists on Sunday, March 14th, 2021, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, right here on Ripon Common Sense Radio and the RiponRabbitHole.com. Speaking of the RiponRabbitHole.com, of course, our favorite hangout ever, the best place in the world to be. Just take it from me, right? Haha, ladies and gentlemen, go on over there to the Ripon Rabbit Hole, sign up for your backstage pass. That's right. You get to hang out backstage with us DJs. It's lots and lots of fun. So come on backstage, sign up for your backstage pass. You'll also automatically be signing up to get our email you're going to get once a week. We do not spam your email box. We do not sell your information. We do not give your information away. The only thing we use your information for is to give you our information of the upcoming week every Wednesday morning. That's right. You're going to get this in your email box. You're going to know all the wolf dens and the rabbit holes that we're going to be digging in and diving down all weekend long. And you can send these out to your friends, your family, your family's friends, your friend's family, or anyone in between. You never know who may be interested in these topics. And looks like we've got a fan trying to call me right now. Totally kidding, but I will take that call later. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to be calling the rest of the rabbits tonight over in the Backstage 24/7 Lounge. That's right. Our video call forum over there is a lot of fun. Come on over. We've got an international audience, and you get to hang out with myself, and sometimes AJ the Ripon Rabbit pops in, and our amazing mod team is always over there hanging out, and the conversation is endless and incredible. Speaking of endless conversation, make sure you drop down the rabbit hole over the riponrabbithole.com. That is our social media alternative. That's right. Instead of being told by the big boys what you can and cannot say, come on over to the riponrabbithole.com where your speech will always be protected. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. And on that note, it's time for us to get on out of here. So on behalf of Chick Mandela Effect, Michael Musco, our amazing mod team over here, AJ the Ripon Rabbit, everybody at Ripon Common Sense Radio, and can't forget our voiceover friend every week here, Mr. Walt House. On behalf of all these folks, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. And remember, until next time, stay awake, but dare to dream. Good night, everybody. Yeah, that's right.
Unlocked and into the dark. Some things are better left unknown. And I'll never find you here, 'cause no one's ever What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. Oh, what a sinner, is it in her? What's the truth in this riddle? Is love really just this simple? I can't seem to find my way in this world that never stays. What a widow, a peaceful spider. When the glass is clean, she's a sneaky hider. Hide the lies and the alibis. What a sinner, is it in her? Is this real? Just illusion? I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. I'm lost in the wonderland of confusion. Is this real or just illusion? Manifestation or a dark delusion? Is this real or just illusion?